Welcome to the first plenary session of the two-day-long Marxist Bicentenary Conference, Language, Literature, Culture and Politics. Our plenary speaker is Professor Salimullah Khan, Professor of General Education Department at University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. He is also the founder and director of Center for Advanced Theory at ULab. Professor Salimullah Khan has numerous publications and writes mainly on history, philosophy, politics, literature, psychoanalysis, and is influenced by the political thinkers like Lukács, Fanon, and Marx. His exploration of Bangladesh's politics and culture has a significant following among the country's young generation of writers and thinkers. He has translated the works of Plato, James Renan, Jacques Lacan, Charles Baudelaire, Franz Fanon, and Dorothy Sole in Bangla. He is associated with a number of organizations such as Center for Asian Arts and Cultures, Ahmed Sofar Rashtor Shobha, and others. His critique on communalism and extremism from historical perspective is worth mentioning. Please welcome Professor Salimullah Khan, who will talk on Marx after Fanon, Whatever Happened to Alienation. Please welcome Professor Salimullah.
Friends, colleagues and comrades, I made my presentation partly in English. I will speak a couple of sentences in Bangla if necessary. So what I'm planning to do is basically giving a reading to Fanon's book called Punwa Maskoblo. I will give you the English translation. The original book was published in 1952. The essay, two essays on which I will mainly focus on, were published in 1951 in a French journal called Esprit, that was in May and April 1951. And having said that, this is the 93rd year of Franz Fanon. If he were alive, he would have been 93. And Marx would have been 200. So the difference between the two is about 107 years. Fanon was born in 1925. The difference is therefore obvious, it's in time, but there are other differences also. Whenever you take the name of Fanon, people will say, sometimes in videos available for free on YouTube, I say, he was a black Frenchman, they say. Someone protests below, saying that he was not a black Frenchman. He was a Frenchman who happened to be black. And the white journalists and theorists in France claim him to be a Frenchman today. But he fought against French colonialism, not just in Algeria, but elsewhere. You'll see this. Now his relationship with Marx is my problematic, and you will see with some evidence. I'll be very, let's say, transient with a few remarks. Then we'll go to his work. Let's take a look at this statement. I use this as epigraph 1. It's from a man called Ulyanovsky, Rostislav Ulyanovsky. He was a third world expert in the former Soviet Union. A book published in 1980 called Problems, Present-day Problems in Asia and Africa. And there he published 10 essays, 5 of them on 5 personalities. Just to give you a perspective, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Kwame Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral, and Franz Fanon, the last man. There he had many interesting things to say about Fanon. And some of these statements we also share in Bangladesh among the left circles. That's why I thought it would not be unwise to draw your attention to some of these hackneyed statements. This one, Fanon came very close to Marxism. Ulyanovsky says, but was not a Marxist. He was neither a materialist nor a dialectician, but a metaphysician. I agree with the last part. He was a physician by training. But Rostislav Ulyanovsky says he was a metaphysician. What does it mean? And I would like to, actually before Hassan Al-Jaid, my friend, invited me to give a talk here, I was engaged in writing an essay called The Metaphysics of Franz Fanon. So it is just the other child of the crocodile that I'm showing you. And 2 other remarks by same Ulyanovsky, which is typical. He says that Fanon was a good man. He did not contrast political struggle with armed struggle, but he overrated violence, perhaps. He will say this. This is a common opinion among European theorists, white, brown, black, everyone, but I would say straightforward that it is false. It is based on, first of all, a non-acquaintance with his writings, and secondly, it's a misinterpretation. He says this: Fanon did not contrast open armed methods with political methods. So far, so good. As certain ideologists of the partisan war in Latin America, you can guess it, he's referring to Regis Debray, Che Guevara, and others, did after him in the mid-60s. But he too did underestimate political work, which I do not think is a correct statement, and was bound to due to his overrating of violence. It so happens that Fanon's most famous book, perhaps, Les Données de la Terre, which is mistranslated as Wretched of the Earth, it should be straightly translated as Damned of the Earth, Dunyar Mazloom, rather than Jagater Lanchito. That book has its first essay, it's called Concerning Violence, on which a film is made now. And that's why it's overrating. But anybody who had the barest acquaintance with the article itself would not agree. I'm one of them. The third allegation, which is also false, and this goes, I'm sorry to say, in the name of Marxism. That's why I said when you say Fanon and Marx, or Marx after Fanon, there is a reason why I'm putting it this way. This is a misinterpretation. Fanon never said that colonialism and ethnic conflict. It is racist. Racist and ethnic difference is not the same thing. But Ulyanovsky, who was an ideologue of the former Soviet Union in the Brezhnev era, in the Andropov era, before Gorbachev, he says this: he did not understand the class character of colonial supremacy. For him, it was ethnic, not class contradictions that were concentrated in colonialism. Hence, a false conclusion: every Frenchman in Algeria was an oppressor. Anybody who has the slightest acquaintance with Frantz Fanon's second book, which is called L'Enceinte de la Révolution Algérienne, which is available in English by the title A Dying Colonialism. It was first published in 1965 as a Studies in Dying Colonialism, after a fashion of Christopher Cordwell's book. There he has his fifth essay, which is called Algeria's European Minority. Many of them participated in favor of the Algerian nationalist movement. It is true, most famous philosophers like Louis Althusser, Jacques Derrida, and today, last but not least, Albert Camus, they were all French Algerians. They were so-called Pieds Noirs people, that means Blackfoot settlers, and many of them turned, what do you call, Jean-François Lyotard, the avatar of post-colonialism or postmodernism, whatever you call it. Those were all against Algeria's liberation. Very few supported Algeria's liberation movement in France, Jean-Paul Sartre being one of them, Jacques Lacan. Of course, Frantz Fanon's name need not be mentioned here. So, this is not a right evaluation. So with this, there are some other allegations as well. I will read just one or two. I did not have time to write them up. Another allegation of Ulyanovsky is that he is categorically against the hegemony of the bourgeoisie. He means Fanon. But neither does he hide his disapproval of the hegemony of the working class. True, he said this, but which working class? For, let us say, today the working class is led by people like Shahjahan Khan. So he said bourgeois trade unionism is also working class. Frantz Fanon precisely says that the opportunists, who are called in this country middle class, if those characteristics percolate into the so-called working class or urban working class, they would play a pro-colonialist role, as they did in Algeria. So that's why, if you take something out of its context and say that Fanon did not support the working class, that would be a travesty of the truth. And Rostislav Ulyanovsky is not alone, my friends. That's why I'm trying to put it. I will just take one quote from his essay. In solving these questions, that means who will lead the national liberation movement? It is not a question of socialism here. Who would lead it? So says that in solving these questions, Fanon did not rise above the level of narrow empiricism. Now you see, in the same essay, it's just 8-page long essay, 8.5, like Fellini's movie. In this essay, Mr. Ulyanovsky is accusing Tavarish. Ulyanovsky is accusing him of 2 crimes, one of being empiricist, another of being metaphysician, as you can hear. The class support given to the resistance war by millions of métayers, Algerian peasants and laborers, led him to make the conclusion about the revolutionary character of the whole peasantry, and in every country at that. This is the end of the accusation in an 8-page long essay, which is also not right. So in this situation, if I'm going to talk about Marx after Fanon, you might raise the question, why torture Marx? This is Marxist anniversary, of course, that's why I need to justify my topic with reference to Marx. What I have been doing in the last 1.5 years is, I wrote 3 essays already. Please excuse me, my self-advertisement. One was Marx after Lenin. It was printed in the Daily Star under the title, Was the Russian Revolution a Proletarian Revolution? The subtext is Marx after Lenin. Another essay that I attempted is from the historical point of view. The great French historian Rodel accuses Marx, believe it or not, as a racist. Many of you probably are not aware of the fact that Marx himself was a black man in European context, but in the films he's being presented as a white man. Like Jesus Christ is being turned into from Palestinian to a Nordic young man. No problem there. Marx was a black man of Spanish origin whose parents were of African origin. His daughters used to call him at home Moor. In German, M-O-H-R, which is in English Moor, the Moor's last side. So, which means he's a Muslim, like Othello. He was a Moorish general. Engels' nickname is in the family was general and Marx's was a Moor, that means a Muslim. But this has been obliterated. But in the case of Frantz Fanon, this could not have been obliterated. Marx in his youth, exactly as age 25, 26 in 1843-44, published 2 essays in the journal that he was editing with his friend Arnold Ruge. The journal is called, difficult name, Deutsche Französische Jahrbuch. In that journal, German-French yearbook, there's 2 essays. One is on the Jewish question, and the other one is called A Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. In the Jewish question, Marx was essentially saying that the Jewish question is an epiphenomenon in European society. If trade and commerce, capitalism, alienated social system can be eliminated, the Jewish question will go away. But you will recognize that after the Second World War, 2 great intellectuals from European background in America published a book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment. These 2 gentlemen are, accordingly, Mr. Max Horkheimer and Theodor Adorno, Wissengrund Adorno. They said that the Jewish question has not evaporated. Nazism is the proof. And I quoted from some one of the statements from there in the abstract that you have in your blue handbook. Let me read it from here. These 2 intellectuals wrote, in 1947 they were writing this. The Jews are today the group which in practice and in theory draws to itself the destructive urge which the wrong social order spontaneously produces. What is this? They say they are branded as absolute evil by absolute evil. In this sense, they are indeed the chosen people. Now that power is no longer needed for economic reason, the Jews are designated as its absolute object, existing merely for the exercise of power. A few years later, in 1948 or so, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a book called Sur la question juive, on the Jewish question, which is now available in English translation, if you would like to consult, Anti-Semite and Jew. There Sartre says that the Jew is determined from inside. What is called determined from inside? Actually, the Freudian term is over-determined from inside. People accuse the Jews of being stingy, so they overspend. They say that you don't invite anybody at your home, so you overspend. If you find a Jew spending too much without thinking about the money, he is suspect. Taking cue to that, Fanon says that my problem is altogether different. in European racist society, which Fanon links with colonialism and slavery, is this. According to his statement, it says this. In Fanon, we meet the Jew, however, as a white man, and he asserts, apart from some rather debatable characteristics, the Jew can sometimes go unnoticed. Fanon writes, he belongs to the race of those who since the beginning of time have never been accused of knowing cannibalism. The black soil. What an idea! To eat one's father? Simple enough. One has only not to be a nigger. You can go in European society sometimes unnoticed. Granted, the Jews are harassed. What am I thinking of? They are hunted down, exterminated, cremated. They are gassed in chambers. But these are little family quarrels, Fanon is saying in his book Black Skin and White Masks. The Jew is disliked from the moment he is tracked down. But in my case, everything takes on a new guise. Fanon italicizes the word new. New guise. What is it? I am given no chance. I am overdetermined from without. The Jew is overdetermined from inside. He is a victim of stereotypes that others hold of him. Fanon says, I do not need the ideas. What do I? I am the slave, not of the idea that others have of me, but of my own appearance. Now my question is, if Fanon's statement has to be taken seriously, we have to go back to Marx. Whatever has happened to Marx's Jewish question, that was the time in economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, known popularly as Paris manuscripts, Marx was elaborating on the Jewish question. So before I would go to that, I would say that Marx's Jewish question has remained unsolved. You might argue as well that Europe has not gone over to socialism. So Marx's concept of alienation was related to buying and selling. Marx was using the word, there is some connection with the German word of selling, Verauserung, and German word for alienation. Yes, Untitled. And from German is a rich language, it has hundreds of words on that, but I'm using only a couple of them. Verauserung, making it out, making it foreign. Alienation, as you can look at the structure of the word. He was always relating it to the laborer alienates his labor and therefore he produces his enemy, as my friend Anu Muhammad was speaking the other day. The paradox of capitalism is that the more the laborer becomes productive, the more alienated he becomes. He enhances his enemy's power. The growth of capital is always against the interest of the worker as a class. This is the paradox. So the question when people are asking, is Fanon Marxist? As you have seen, Ulyanovsky doesn't think so. But some people have always asked that, does he need to be a Marxist? He is a Marxist in the sense that we do not often ask the question, what was Marx's philosophical standpoint? That was called phenomenology. By the way, if you are forgetting it, it should be reminded. Experience not of the individual, but experience of the species being. Gattungswesen, as they say in German. Man is a species being. So it's the whole experience of mankind. Whether it is of the Santo Domingo rebellion or of Greek philosophy, doesn't matter. Jagat Julia ek jati ache she jati na manush jati. That is the Gattungswesen. Man is a species being. So all experience of mankind has found its concealed experience in Marx's Capital. So the way Marx is written is from experience. The word experience in French has two meanings. As you know, it means experience as we understand this in English, but in French it is an extra meaning, experiment. L'expérience vécue, everyday experience, lived experience. Fanon wrote from that standpoint. That's why I say Fanon doesn't need to be a Marxist. He only needs to be committed to the truth, and that makes him Marxist. What makes you a Marxist? Let's say. I borrow one line from the Hungarian philosopher Georgi Lukács, who writes in German normally. In his book, History and Class Consciousness, I just borrowed one line. What is orthodox Marxism? That is the name of the essay. He says, let us, for the sake of argument, agree that all the empirical theses Marx has forwarded, there will be revolution, miserization of the working class, let us say everything is false. Will there be any value left to Marx's teaching then? He says, yes, there will be. He says this. Orthodox Marxism, therefore, does not imply the uncritical acceptance of the results of Marx's investigations. It is not the belief, quote unquote, in the original, in these or that thesis. This book was written, by the way, in 1919, right after the First World War. I quote from a 1971 English translation by Rodney Livingstone. It is not the belief in these or that thesis, nor the exegesis of a quote unquote sacred book. On the contrary, orthodoxy refers exclusively to method, to questions of method. So what method is Fanon following? I say it's the phenomenological method. The cover of his book in English, Fanon's method can be summarized as well. Alienation in colonial society. Two kinds of alienations he speaks of this. There is not only the black or the brown or the yellow. The white, the colonizer, is also alienated. So he gives slightly twisted meaning to the word alienation. In the German philosopher Hegel, alienation was the self-alienation of the mind. Marx calls this abstract mental labor. Creation of civilization is alienation, of course. Then alienation and its negation, the two make the civilization. That is the Freudian project in the phenomenology of spirit. Marx takes cue. His first critique of Hegel's book was in 1843-44. There he says that the heart of Hegel's system is in this book, but this book makes one advance. Hegel's standpoint is essentially the standpoint of the classical political economists. Sir James Stewart, Adam Smith, David Ricardo. They were contemporaries. That is why he has made one step forward. Good. Now Marx has made another step forward. It is the alienation of the worker, which is at the essence of the capitalist development. Now Fanon takes completely a different tack. He says, my alienation, a colonial subject who has been subjected to slavery. This came in Marx's analysis of the primitive accumulation of capital, hunting of the black skin in the African quandaries. Just not metals in South America. That is why Fanon's method is here. He takes a stand from what I call subjective standpoint. With due respect to Karl Marx, we must say that Marx did not undergo the experience of being a slave himself. He was an intellectual. He was a little bit apart in European society. Now German friends are making films on him as a white man, but that did not end his personal alienation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking a little bit more about the national alienation. The Jewish alienation in German society came to full fruit in the Second World War. But it was always there. But here I'm talking about slavery as experienced not just by a person, but by whole people, whole peoples in the world. So Fanon begins his book with this introduction. The explosion will not happen today. It is either too soon or it is too late. This book, a little later he says that, this book should have been written 3 years ago. But these truths were a fire in me then. Now I can tell them without being burned. You see, there is a reference to fire. Their intertextuality for literature students. Fanon has been now made fashionable in so-called post-colonial studies, but completely to the detriment of Fanon's real thesis. He says, this fire makes a reference, you will see, to Dante's Inferno in the next few sentences. It's just not any fire. Now he is making a narration like Virgil. Now I am cool, I will retell you the story. I can now say, and this also shows his method. 3 years ago, he was at that time 24 years old when he wrote this book, but he published it at 27 in 1952. He was exactly the same age as Marx was in 1844. That is very interesting. Had he lived longer, had he not died at age 36, something, the world would have got something else. So, next one. Fanon says, there are many liberals, those who preach liberty, equality and fraternity, French Revolution especially. And this liberal chicanery, the liberal deception, he takes it by the collar and says that let us ask one simple question. What does the black man want? What does the man want? He's borrowing a leaf from Freud's book. What does the woman want? Or for that matter, for Rabindranath Tagore's Ghare Baire, Nari ki chai, chai go. He's simply asking this, what does the black man want? If you ask this simple question, you would have found a solution to this problem. But you don't dare. You simply use them as a problem. W.E.S. Du Bois said this, that whenever the black man raises a question, when the slave raises a question, you problematize the slave. But the problem is in you. Fanon is exactly making a textual reference to that, saying that, cooled. This is a statement from Louis Gordon, a Caribbean philosopher. In his book, What Fanon Said, I borrowed from this book a few lines. Cooled, he reflects sardonically on modern liberalism, which means equal rights and fraternity, and the many ways in which modern thinkers have attempted to address this so-called black problem. But Fanon says this, a single line would be enough. Supply a single answer and the color problem will be stripped of all its significance. What is the problem? What does a man want? I emphasize, what does the black man want? Kevul, what do you want? If you can answer this question, now you can say, how do I know what does the black man want? There may be a conflation between the desire of the individual black man and the black man as a concept, what they will call the niggers. What do the niggers want? In French, the word is nègre. There are two words in French, le noir and le nègre. And you will know the nuance of this. This is the whole problem of alienation. I cannot demonstrate everything. I will confine myself to only first chapter. So, le noir et le langage. The black man and language. An individual black man's desire may not comport with the structural notions of the black desire. I take that note. Ekta panir bottle dite pareন স্যার? তো এখানে আছে না? হ্যাঁ, thank you. গলা শুকিয়ে যায়. Many Negroes now says that many Negroes will not find themselves in what follows. Wherever there is nag, I just use this translation. I took it from the Charles Markman translation. This is equally true of many whites. But the fact that I feel a foreigner in the worlds of the schizophrenic or the sexual cripple in no way diminishes their reality. The attitudes that I propose to describe here are real. I have encountered them innumerable times. In Marseille, in Pigalle, in Paris, among the pimps, among the students, among the workers, he goes on saying this. So why I'm going there? I'm speaking here, on the one hand, of alienated blacks, and on the other hand, of no less alienated whites. This is a double bound problem. There is, now here's the question, again this reference to Purgatory, Dante. There is a zone of non-being. Fanon's language is called phenomenological, a little bit condensed, but bear with me for a few minutes. I will try to make it a little bit easier. There is a zone of non-being, an extraordinary sterile and arid region, an utterly naked declivity where an authentic upheaval can be born. But unfortunately, in most cases, the black man, Fanon simply writes the black in French, but the man is inserted with English translators. It is a gender-neutral term, le noir, which can be used for the black man and woman. The advantage of being able to accomplish this descent into hell. Remember, fire and hell. Hell is a source not only of light, also of heat. Perhaps more heat than light. And that is part of the problem. Blacks may have two situations. Some blacks are taught, these are the docile Uncle Toms. We don't lack in them. They are taught that you are better, a little bit better than those damned yellows. Or you Martinicans are better than the Senegalese, creating a hierarchy. But there is a zone where you are just non-being. Fanon says many does not have the advantage of realizing that they are just nothing. So in that situation, what can be done? Fanon begins with his own experience. One day in Lyon, where he was a medical student, he was going by train. Remember, he was a soldier, he was a liberation fighter during the Second World War. Wounded 2 times and decorated 2 times. He got something like a Bir Uttam, a Bir Pratik. Even so, he was not allowed to participate in the victory triumph ceremony. All of them black were deported because they did not want to show the blacks as liberators of France in 1945. So this is another story. So when he was back there in 1947 as a student, this is in the train, I just quoted his exact experience as he wrote it in English translation. Look, a Negro. Tiens, un egg. There's this child says to her mother. Or simply, sale neg, dirty Negro. It was an external stimulus that afflicted over me as I passed by. I made a tight smile. If someone tells you you are a Negro, you say, this is child is saying, I was amused. Next, look, a Negro. It was true. It amused me. Look, a Negro, a third person says. The circle was drawing a bit tighter. I made no secret of my amusement. I was still trying to smile, but I could not laugh. You will say, Mama, see the Negro? I'm afraid. I'm frightened. J'ai peur, the child says. Frightened? To a peur? Frightened? Now they were beginning to be afraid of me. I made up my mind to laugh myself to tears, but laughter had become impossible. This is called l'expérience vécue du noir, chapter 5 of Punois Masque Blanc. I gave the page numbers for those interested to follow through the English translation, 111 and 12. Then I could no longer laugh because I already knew that there were legends, stories, history, and above all, historicity, which I had learned about from Jaspers. Historicity, I should have italicized this word. I missed it. You do miss, you will see that missing is also part of our game. You missed the boat. I missed to italicize it. History and historicity is not the same thing. Man is just not a physical animal. Man is just not another animal. Man is an animal in which history has already entered. Some people think that we speak. Of course we do speak, but there is no speech without bodies. Speech is embodied, and you will see the interaction. Yes, semiology is semiotic, and we'll come across this. Overnight, Fanon says, the Negro has been given 2 frames of reference within which he had to place himself. Here comes again this unfortunate word, metaphysics. Poor Aristotle, who is perhaps responsible for making this word poor, where he says the first sentence of metaphysics in Aristotle begins with man by nature desires to know. But Freud, many thousand years later, would say that this is false. Man by nature doesn't want to know. Man wants to know is Aristotle. Freud says man does not want to know. If he wanted to know, he would have interpreted his dreams where the true message is encoded, but he is afraid to decipher it. His unconscious is unattainable to him. So here you will see why they are telling me, you are a French citizen, you are a liberation fighter, but at the same time I remain a Negro. It says, go to your own country. This is not a problem of the past. This is not a problem of Greek civilization. This is a problem today, everywhere. Now I see that Germany has accepted the Muslims living in Germany are also part of German society. I'm relieved. But a society, Fanon is one of the dictums of Fanon is that a society is either racist or not racist. It cannot be half. Pardon me, some feminist workers often object to my saying this. You are either pregnant or not pregnant. There is no half pregnancy. Racism is like that, and we'll see this. Overnight, the Negro has been given 2 frames of reference, with which he had to place himself. What is it? He had been a Martinican, before that he had been an African, and now he has to be French. Our ancestors, the Gauls, they have to memorize this in high school. So that's why I say his metaphysics, or less pretentiously, his customs and the sources on which they were based were wiped out because they were in conflict. With whom? With a civilization that he did not know and that imposed itself on him. French has to be his language, he cannot speak Creole. Of course, for us, Queen's English, for them, French. So he says that if I fail at that level, I cannot make you understand why I fail at the level of language, the proper tool of investigation. Now, he changes it to psychoanalysis, classical psychoanalysis, Lacanian psychoanalysis. Fanon was well versed in Lukács' works in 1950s, by the way. So he says that, let me try. This is a very complex concept. If I fail at this level, in the French word is échec. There is another French word called raté. If I fail as a father, one means if I fail to live up to my responsibility as a father, is something like that. If I fail at this level, let me try the other level. What is it? If there can be no discussion on a philosophical level, they say, black man, you are trying to cite Marx to us? You ingrate? Or our number one enemy is the school teacher. You come here, as the Southern slave owners would say. If there can be no discussion of a philosophical level, that is the plane of the basic needs of humanity, human reality, I am willing to work on the psychoanalytical level. In other words, the level of the failures, quote unquote, in the sense in which one speaks of engine failures. This is a direct quote from Fanon. Now we see today I read a news in our online newspapers. There may be fake news. Please bear with me. Just that in Dhaka University, a teaching couple has been accused of torturing their domestic servant. One of the allegations is that the domestic servant's name, she's from Panchagod, Anita. Reportedly, they said a domestic servant girl cannot have such a modern name. It is one of her faults that her name is Anita. So I say it's like this. If it does not work at that level, let us try. Language is a construction that has the force of forming reality. I'm trying to make it as positivistic as possible from a phenomenological language. You cannot think without language. Then Fanon recalls Paul Valéry's thesis that language is the God gone astray in the flesh. What does this metaphor mean? Language is power. He cites an anecdote when Aimé Césaire was campaigning for the election in 1945. He was a candidate for French National Assembly seat on behalf of the Communist Party of Martinique. And one day in the lecture hall, a woman fainted and says that, why did she faint? Well, such is the power of language. The poet speaks so eloquently, the woman fainted. So it was not out of it. So what happened? Now the black man tries to become white because I know that if you do not speak good English in Bangladesh, you don't have a good job. Yes, if you don't speak good French, they do not even vote for you. Believe it or not, the black takes it upon himself or herself to transform the world through a different language of self-presentation. In Martinique, the middle class do not speak Creole except to their servants. In Bangladesh too, in Calcutta also, Shohid Sarwat, these memoirs tell me that they didn't speak Akbar Kabir's memoirs say that. They spoke Urdu, but only to the servant they spoke Bengali. So this is like this. He attempts to leave words that transcend, if not eradicate, blackness. Yes, I can partially eradicate, I believe, my blackness if I speak good English with an American accent. The efforts are familiar. I'm not black really. I'm mulatto, I'm a little brown. You say, and I'm from Bangladesh, but I can't speak Bangla. Yeah, this is our experience. So I would save time. The Negro arriving in France will react against the myth of the R-eating man from Martinique. On page 21, what he wrote, I did not have time to copy it, so let me give you one example of what is the R-eating man. The man comes to France, he says this: the Negro arriving in France will react against the myth of the R-eating man from Martinique. He will become aware of it, and he will really go to war against it. He will practice not only rolling his R, but embroidering it. He will say, ah. Furtively observing the slightest reactions of others, listening to his own speech, suspicious of his own tongue, a wretchedly lazy organ. as Fanon says it, he will lock himself into his room and read aloud for hours, desperately determined to learn, quote unquote, diction. An example. Recently, an acquaintance told me a story. Fanon says, a Martinique Negro landed at Le Havre and went into a bar. With the utmost self-confidence, he called, waiter, bring me a beer. Here is a genuine intoxication. Resolved not to fit the myth of the nigger who eats his ass, he had acquired a fine supply of them, but allocated it badly. Waiter, garçon, he says, garçon. That is how it was done. So what is this? He said, this is alienation. But alienation is of many different types. But how to get through this? The middle class in the Anti never speak Creole except to their servants, which I already cited. In any group, another point. If a man speaks, for example, I remember I came from Chittagong. Bengali is not, by the way, my hometown. I learned it when in class 8 or 9. So, I had always a complex. I couldn't speak Bangla well, so I had to write it up and then read it in school debating societies. I read it from my scripts. And my speech was full of Sanskritized words. So people say he speaks like a book. I was thinking, it's like, yeah, it resonates my experience. In any group of young men in the Auntie, the one who expresses himself well, who has mastered the language, look at the word master, it is inordinately feared. Keep an eye on that one. He is almost white. In France, one says he talks like a book. In Martinique, he talks like a white man. So language is the resistor in which you change your ontology. You try, but you will fail. Fanon says this. Experience shows that Fanon, by the way, spoke French extremely well, better than the Frenchmen of his time. And therefore they said, how long have you been in France really? You speak so well. You are at bottom a white man. He often had to face this. In one of his lectures, he made a comparison with European poetry and Negro poetry. You know, in 1948, Léopold Sédar Senghor published a volume called Anthology of Negro and Malgache Poetry. Fanon was talking about that. So he said, why I am given honorary European white citizenship? Because of the fact that I happen to speak master your language. So here's the tragedy. I tried to speak your language because I wanted to prove that I'm worth something. But you said that I'm only trying to pretend that I'm white. I have no place to go there. If I speak well, if I don't speak, then you condescend. You speak pidgin nigger to me. You say, you boy, go 1, 2, 3, and then left. That's how you talk to me. Nothing is more astonishing. Not only they do this, not only to the blacks, but also the Algerians. Fanon, as a young doctor, experienced this again and again in Parisian hospitals. They talk and treat differently the Algerian patients. Condescending way. But they said, Fanon says, they understand my English, my French very well. But whenever a white man goes there, my colleagues, they quickly change their gear. But at the same time, they address the white patients completely in a different register. What is this? He says, this is tragedy. And for the white man, he doesn't even understand this. But the black man, this is a tragedy. Nothing is more astonishing than to hear a black man express himself properly. Fanon, one of them. For then in truth, he is called putting on the white world. In French it's called pondre blanc. You are taking on the white world. Mot blanc. I have had occasion to talk with students of foreign origin. The racism comes clear. Fanon's experience. They speak French badly. Très mal. Little Crusoe, alias Prospero, is at ease then. You see Fanon's depth of references, the depth of field, from Dante, Virgil to Shakespeare to Daniel Defoe, says, he explains, informs, interprets, helps them with their studies. Suppose a Hungarian speaks bad French, he is being helped. But when a Martinican speaks a bit bad and says that you are no good, you're nigger. But with a Negro, like Fanon, he is completely baffled. The Negro has made himself just as knowledgeable. With him, this game cannot be played. He is a complete replica of the white man, so there is nothing to do but to give in. What a shame. And we'll see. Here is an example. This comes from a great writer, Michel Solomon, in his essay called Un Juif à the Neck, published in famous journal called Présence Africaine in about 1950, number 5, etc. What did he say? This is testimony. In a footnote, Fanon provides this. I know some Negroes in the School of Medicine. In a word, they were a disappointment. Why? The color of their skin should have permitted them to give us the opportunity to be charitable, generous, or scientifically friendly. They were derelict in their duty. In this duty, this claim on our goodwill. Why? All our tearful tenderness, all our calculated solicitude were a drug on the market. We had no Negroes to condescend to, nor did we have anything to hate them for. They counted for virtually as much as we in the scale of the little jobs and petty chicaneries of daily life. So a smart Negro is a failure too. It is a double standard. Now I take this from Gordon's conclusion. It is a double standard that is demanded. Blacks are human if they can speak white. But if they can speak white, they are dangerous. Therefore, they must be reminded of their limitation. What is the limitation? Yeah, the black man is supposed to be a good nigger. Once this has been laid down, the rest follows of itself. To make him talk pidgin is to fasten him to the effigy of him, to imprison him, the eternal victim of an essence, the black man who cannot speak French, of an appearance for which he is not responsible. But in the train, when that child says, Mama, I'm afraid. So he says, when the Negro cites Montesquieu, you should be watching him. If he talks of Marx, then he's totally dangerous. Again, poor Marx comes back here in Fanon's experience. And naturally, just as a Jew who spends money without thinking about it is a suspect, a black man who quotes Montesquieu had better be watched. When a Negro talks of Marx, the first reaction is always the same. We have brought you up to our level, and now you turn against your benefactors, swing greats. Obviously, nothing can be expected of you. And then too, there is that bludgeon argument of the plantation owner in Africa, our enemy is the teacher. So now the question, tragedy is now turned into a tragicomedy and through a farce. I'm quickening up my speech. What I'm asserting is that all these are quotations from Fanon. I don't have to say anything. I will only intersperse with a few remarks. Is that the European has a fixed concept of the Negro. And there is nothing more exasperating than to be asked, how long have you been in France? You speak French so well. This is what we call in Bengali Shakir Kara. Ashteo kate, jeteo kate. You'll see. Rather than more than a year ago in Lyon, I remember in a lecture, I had drawn a parallel between Negro and European poetry. And a French acquaintance told me enthusiastically, at bottom, you are a white man. And says, so why do you have to say these things? When Aimé César's book was introduced by a French man, what did he say? And it was introduced by no other than a great man as André Breton, Jean-Paul Sartre, everyone. Fanon takes issue with them. He admired them, but at the same time, he took issue with them, saying that some other factors are worth a certain amount of attention. For example, Charles-André Julien introducing Aimé Césaire as, quote-unquote, a Negro poet with a university degree. Why do you have to mention this? Because Negroes usually don't have a university degree. Or again, quite simply, the expression, a great black poet. Now Fanon says, these ready-made phrases, which seem in a common sense way to feel a need for Aimé Césaire is really black and also happens to be a poet. But this whole game had a hidden subtlety, a permanent rub. What is this? That you will never be assimilated. Where they were assimilating and where they did not, the two things a man who assimilates to French culture is called an évolué, one who evolved from ape to man, in between, is a missing link. So I say now here is the theoretical point. There is a resistance. You want to change your language, but the meaning changes. When you have master French, this is, you are mimicking. You have become a mimic man. Here is the question. Mastering the language for the sake of recognition as white reflects a dependency that subordinates the black's humanity. A man who is dependent is not a full man. The blacks unwittingly place themselves in an inferior, compromising position to that of the whites. The blacks' attempt to assert themselves against the colonialists serve to imply that they seek recognition from the colonialists and are therefore relegated to an inferior status. Now, I'm towards the end of my presentation. The Negro symbolizes the biological, according to the European point of view. So therefore the words they use, Fanon is giving you evidence. First of all, he enters puberty at the age of 9 and is a father at the age of 10. This is European notion. And it's also notion about Muslims in some other countries. He is hot-blooded and his blood is strong, he is tough. As a white man remarked to me, this is the beauty of Fanon's books, that you read them as if you are reading a novella. As a white man remarked to me not long ago, with a certain bitterness, you all have strong constitutions. A tribute, of course. What a beautiful race! Look at the Senegalese, the player Mbappé, for example. They keep saying that. Weren't they called our black devils during the war? Yes, our bastard in Havana. It's like that. Weren't they called our black devils? But they must be brutal. This is now, Fanon quickly changes register. It's now a woman speaking, but he doesn't mention it clearly who is speaking where. I just can see them putting those big hands of theirs on my shoulders. I shudder at the mere thought of it. Now, the language. You are aware that in certain cases one must interpret the opposite, by opposite. Fanon says, I understand this extra fragile woman. At bottom, what she wants most is to have the powerful Negro bruise her frail shoulders. Sartre says that when one speaks the phrase a young Jewess, there is an imaginary reek of rape and pillage. Conversely, we might say that the expression a handsome Negro contains a possible allusion to similar phenomena. I have always been struck by the speed with which handsome young Negro turns into a young colt or stallion. So, this from the next book. This same theme continues. I take one quote from this book, A Dying Colonialism. This is about the dream of the colonizer in Algeria, how they look at the woman. This is from the famous essay, Algeria Unveiled. With an Algerian woman, there is no progressive conquest, no mutual revelation. Straight off, win the maximum of violence. With the maximum of violence, there is possession, rape, near murder. The act assumes a para-neurotic brutality and sadism. This brutality and this sadism are in fact emphasized by the frightened attitude of the Algerian woman. In the dream, this is most important, I draw your attention, ladies and gentlemen. The woman victim screams, struggles like a dog, and as there is a misprint, and as she weakens and faints, is penetrated, martyrized, ripped apart. This is from that essay. Now, from the last essay, last book, you see, whenever they are using this terminology about third world people in general, there is a continuum. These are all. This is from the famous essay from which I took the French quote from Fanon, where he says that whenever we have to deal with the colonial problem, he says that Marxist analysis needs to be slightly stretched. Why? Because the causality changes here. The cause becomes the consequence becomes the cause. There is a misprint in the printer because of my fault. It says that you are rich because you are white because you are rich. The causality becomes over-determining. So he says at times, this monarchism, black and white world, goes to its logical conclusion and dehumanizes the native. Here is the problem. To speak plainly, it turns him into an animal. In fact, the terms the settler uses when he mentions the native are zoological terms. He speaks of the yellow man's reptilian motions, of the stink of the native quarter of Kasbah, of breeding swans, of foulness, of spawn, of gesticulations. When the settler seeks to describe the native fully, in exact terms, he constantly refers to the bestiary. So what remains? I am about to conclude. It must in any case be remembered that a colonized people is not simply a dominated people. This is the mistake of certain Marxists, not only Rustislav Ulyanovsky, but also French Communist Party, for your kind information. For example, Dominique Octave Manoni, who wrote a book called The Psychology of Colonialism, he takes that French society is the least racist of all European societies, therefore France cannot be responsible for introducing racism in these islands. They were racist themselves. Jean-Paul Sartre also, in his famous introduction to that anthology called Black Orpheus, said the same thing. Negritude is anti-racist racism. Fanon takes issue with that. He's, should I use the old expression, a real stallion. He says this. It must in any case be remembered that a colonized people is not simply a dominated people. A little bit more. Under the German occupation, the French remain man. Under the French occupation, the Germans remain man. Fanon says elsewhere also, there were hardly any cases of mutual rape between the Germans and the French. If they did go to place, they paid for it. If you need a literary reference, I would draw your attention to Bull the Swift, the story by Guy de Maupassant in the Franco-Prussian War of 1817. Maupassant just began his writing enterprise at that time. There he says that all the German soldiers entering Paris, they are going to the quarters, but they are paying for them. And one of the characters is called Bull the Swift, a very fat woman. She too was made her payments. But why? It is forgotten when you change the border. That he says that in Algeria, there is not simply the domination, but the decision to the latter not to occupy anything more than the sum total of the land. Nothing more than the sum total of the land. They would not even let Sahara go alone. They need it for their nuclear experiments. The Algerians, the veiled women, the palm trees, and the camels make up the landscape. The natural background to the human presence of the French. It is the colonizer who makes history. So I should thank you for your wonderful patience.